Our world is grieving both collectively and individually. Months into this global pandemic, we are still wondering when life will return to normal. Undoubtedly, you and family members may have guessed as to when that might happen, but until then, we all have to live in this unusual time. Thankfully, we don't have to carry on alone. Today's teaching text is John chapter 11. John 11 begins with Mary and Martha sending word to Jesus that Lazarus is sick. It's likely that they sent word to Jesus so that he could heal Lazarus, as is evident from the probing statement that both Mary and Martha offer Jesus when he does arrive. But more on that later. In hearing that Lazarus is sick, Jesus prophesies, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus has a plan for this situation, although we have to read the whole chapter to see how it plays out. Even though he has a plan, Jesus doesn't do what the messenger probably thought would happen or what the disciples thought would happen, definitely not Mary and Martha. He stays put. Then some time passes, and a few verses later, we get a clue about Jesus' plan. Jesus tells the disciples that it's time to go to Bethany because Lazarus is asleep. It takes them a few minutes and a couple back and forth with Jesus, but they realize that by asleep, he means that Lazarus has died. Now, you may be thinking, and they could have been too, Jesus, you said that Lazarus wouldn't die. What's going on here? But a close reading of the text reveals that this isn't what Jesus said. He didn't say Lazarus wouldn't die, but that this sickness would not end in death. This might be one and the same for people who just are reading this text, but for a believer, this nuance is essential. We see in this distinction that God's plan doesn't include death as the end. There's something greater. Upon his arrival in Bethany, Mary comes out to speak with Jesus, and the first thing she says to him is, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." We already know that the sisters sent word to Jesus because Lazarus was sick, and here we realize that they sent word so that Jesus could heal their brother. They clearly believed in Jesus' ability to heal. We learn more about Martha's faith in this exchange, but we and Martha also learn more about Jesus. Part of Jesus' plan is to reveal himself to us. Jesus says here, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha?" Her response to this question is the most comprehensive declaration of Jesus' identity up to this point in the Gospel of John. She says, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." Even in the midst of grief, Martha still holds on to her faith. And this faith is a foundation on which Jesus is able to build. He is able to reveal more of who he is and to draw her into a deeper knowledge and faith of who he is. Later, when speaking with Mary, we see Jesus' emotions. Verses 33 and following of our passage say, "When Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled." Jesus asks, "Where have you laid him?" "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Now, this first verse here has never really jumped out at me before. It seems quite normal. A human sees other humans crying, and so they cry. Happens to me all the time. But here, the Greek says something differently. The phrase in the New International Version, which is translated, "was deeply moved in spirit," was a common Greek phrase, which meant to snort like a horse. Think like a war horse. This phrase implied anger and indignation. This is hardly how I have ever read this verse. The New Living Translation renders the same verse like this. "When Jesus saw Mary weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled." Now, what could Jesus possibly be angry about? Is he mad that they're mourning Lazarus? Is he mad that they're sad? What is really happening? Perhaps if we could see into Jesus' mind, it might shed some light. Perhaps Jesus is remembering the beginning, the very beginning. He remembers it because he was there. He was the Word, and he was with God, and he was God. He remembers the Father creating life through him, life that was good and very good. That is, until he came, that evil one of old, the serpent who was more crafty than any other creature, the one who brought death and suffering into God's good and very good work. Jesus was seeing the full picture in this moment. The weight of this is what angers Jesus. The weight of darkness in the world he helped create and the brokenness that this darkness caused. Seeing his friends mourn Lazarus, seeing the death that death causes, seeing his own friend whom he loves in a tomb, this is what angers Jesus. The utter wailing, the suffering, the death of all humankind of all time. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" The Jews just didn't get it. And they didn't get it for two reasons. First, Jesus wasn't only crying for Lazarus. He was crying for all of us and the suffering that we all inevitably face. Second, Jesus absolutely could have saved Lazarus from dying, but that wasn't the plan. Jesus was planning to do so much more. Lazarus' sickness wouldn't end in death because death does not have the final say in the life of a believer. Lazarus' resurrection points to Jesus' own resurrection and to Jesus as the resurrection and the life. As you and I mourn for the lives we once knew, Jesus is weeping with us. As we wait for the suffering to subside, Jesus is weeping with us. As we grieve the canceled plans and the lack of physical proximity with friends, Jesus is weeping with us. As we grieve the familiarity of going to church, Jesus is weeping with us. When prayer after prayer is offered to the Father saying, "God, if only you were here, we would not be suffering," we must remember that we believe in a risen Savior who is sitting with us in this worry, in the stress, in the grief, in the suffering, and that Jesus is weeping with us. There will be a time when God speaks again and life will rise up. Until then, we are best comforted in the hope that Christ offers and the knowledge that there is always a plan in which the darkness of this world will not end in death. Let him build upon your faith in this time so that he might reveal more of himself to you. Revelation 21:4 says, "He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." Until then, you are not alone. God is still compassionate. That has not changed. If his children are hurting, he is hurting. Lastly, God's plan is bigger than anything we could imagine. So take refuge in Jesus, the resurrection and the life.